let's explain the exposure triangle. And I'm gonna explain it first, and then I'm gonna dive into my computer and actually show you some visuals because it's just easier that way. So the exposure triangle, it's made up of ISO, shutter speed, aperture. These all work in relation to each other, so each one affects the other one. For example, if I have a really wide open aperture, you're gonna get a blurry background. You see my background here is a little bit blurred out, but if I go and I change the aperture, all of a sudden you see the background is starting to come into focus. But what happens, the trade-off is you lose light. It'll be easier for me to dive into the computer and show you visually how this works. So boom, let's go. All right, so we want to talk about the exposure triangle. And as you saw from the previous clip, every adjustment you make has a trade-off. So when I adjusted the when I adjusted the aperture to close a little bit more, you lose light. So up here at the top, we have less light. Up here at the bottom, we have more light, right? So I want you to think of each of this part of the triangle as part of your eye. So think of the aperture like your pupil. Think of shutter speed like you blinking. And I want you to think of ISO like you are putting on and taking off sunglasses of different shades. So at ISO 100, you have less light, so you have the heaviest sunglasses you can on, but it's really bright out, so you can see just fine, and it's really sharp. As you move the ISO up, you're taking off layers of shade on your sunglasses, right? So ISO 200, you're letting more light in. ISO 400, you're letting more light in. And then as you get up to 12,800, and some cameras go really high, 25,600, 3,200, 32,000. As you get up higher, the trade-off is that your images get grainy. So around 3,200, you start really noticing that noise and grain in your pictures. You don't want to push too many cameras past 3,200 or your images will come out noisy. All right, let's jump to aperture, right? So as you close your aperture, as you can see, 1.4, and some cameras go down to 1.2, even 0.8, but those are very specialized lenses. Most portrait lenses go to 1.4. And I do want to clarify that aperture is on the lens, not on the camera body. So different lenses will have different amounts of aperture. So standard for portrait lenses is 1.4. Most box lenses will only go down to 2.8 or maybe even f4. If you want this extra, they're called f-stops. If you want these extra f-stops, you'll have to get a more portrait lens or a low light lens, because as you can see, the wider open this aperture is, the more light you let in. So when you think of it like your pupil, when it's really dark out, your pupil gets bigger to let more light in, right? And when it's really bright out, your pupil gets smaller to let less light in, because there's plenty of light coming in, so you can have a smaller pupil and still be able to see. Same idea, where your pupil's really big, more light, your pupil's really small, less light. However, the trade-off is when you are wide open, you are only getting the subject in focus. Everything else, the background is blurred out. And when you are all the way closed, everything is in focus. So there's nothing blurred out. And I like to think of the difference of saying this is like, think of your cell phone lens camera. When you take a picture on your cell phone, nothing is blurred out. When you take a picture on, a budget camera that has a lens with an f-stop and a decent sized sensor, everything is blurred out. That's the trade-off with aperture. Over on to shutter speed. Think of shutter speed as you blinking. The longer it takes for me to blink, if you see here, so the longer it takes for me to blink, the more light I can let in before I blink. So the slower your shutter speed, the more light you let in, right? The faster your shutter speed, I'm blinking really fast, there's no time for light to come in. So the faster your shutter speed, the less light comes in. Now for the trade-off. When you have a really fast shutter speed, it's less light, but you can catch things moving in motion really fast. When you have a slow shutter speed to let in more light, then objects in motion will be very blurry, right? So let's say you want to take a picture of somebody walking down the street, how fast should your shutter speed be? I would say anywhere between 250 and 500. 125 is good for still portraits. If the person's not moving and maybe a little twitch happens, you're fine. If you're getting anything under 125, that's when you're gonna start to need a tripod to stabilize your images, because even a slight click of the button on the camera will initiate enough camera shake to blur out this subject a little bit. Those are the trade-offs of intro to exposure triangle. All right, so that's the exposure triangle. If you like this type of content, I'd really appreciate you just showing some love. Let me know in the comments what else you want to see. I'm always down in there trying to get ideas on what videos to make next, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.